Welcome to Longevity Industries' presentation of the Destiny of Manufacturing podcast, brought to you today by the Precision Metalforming Association and the PMA's Educational Foundation. Today I have the distinct pleasure of having Paul Nathanson from the Bracewell Group, and we have Omar Nashshibi from Franklin Partnership. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you.
And what I'd like to do is give you an opportunity to kind of talk about what is the Franklin Partnership and what is Bracewell.
Thank you. This is Omar Nashshibi, one of the founding partners of the Franklin Partnership. We're a bipartisan lobbying firm based in Washington, D.C., and we've been lobbying on behalf of the Precision Metalforming Association and the broader metalworking industry now since about 2002. We were actually originally hired in part because of the 201 steel tariffs and the effect that they were having on the broader industry. And our job was to lobby the administration to lift those early, which in fact we were successful doing. So as a lobbyist on behalf of the industry, our job is to work with members of Congress, work with the White House, work with regulatory officials to help them better understand the priorities of the industry, ranging from tariffs and trade to taxes to workforce to healthcare.
And this is Paul Nathanson. I'm a partner in the Policy Resolution Group at Bracewell, and I run the Strategic Communications practice. And our focus is on strategic communications, media relations, public affairs. We work hand in hand with the Franklin Partnership on the advocacy program on behalf of PMA and other manufacturing clients, and have also done so since 2002, and was in the fight to end the steel tariffs, a successful fight. And so we work very closely in Washington with Omar and his team in representing the manufacturing community.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for being here today. We really appreciate you guys taking time out of your busy schedule. I know with all the changes that are going on in Washington right now, it's a very important time for us to get our message out from a manufacturing standpoint of how important things like the steel and aluminum tariffs are to a manufacturer at the end of the day. Can you guys talk a little bit about communicating that message and also about what can be done from an advocacy standpoint?
Sure. Maybe I can give a quick overview of what happened, what the administration is doing, and then Paul can talk about the communications and the 6.5 million steel-consuming jobs in those. And so this is Omar with the Franklin Partnership, and having lobbied on tariffs for a number of years now, it does feel like deja vu all over again in many ways. So on March 8th, the administration announced they were going to impose 25% tariffs on all steel products from all countries except Canada and Mexico, and 10% tariffs on all aluminum products from all countries with the exception of Canada and Mexico. By March 18th, so most likely by the end of this week, we expect to see a process by which other countries can also submit requests for exclusions from the 25% across the board. So this does include flat, pipe, rolled, tubes, all of these within those areas. In the aluminum side, they included all the primary, all secondary aluminum, and all other products thereof. They did also extend it to downstream for aluminum castings and aluminum forgings as well. It's of note that virtually the entire manufacturing sector has come out opposed to these tariffs because of concern that it's not just going to increase the price for consumers, but it'll also lead to this shifting and importation of more metal stampings. So, for example, if we're going to make our product more expensive, we're going to see our customers going overseas, purchasing that raw material already in a stamping that comes in duty and tariff-free. Even the Aluminum Association has come out opposed to these tariffs. They are slated to take effect at 12:01 a.m. on March 23rd. It'll apply to basically anything that's within the U.S. Customs Law's territories. And so if it's out of the warehouse, even if it's on the water, if it's in the U.S., it has to be U.S. and through U.S. Customs by that 12:01 on March 23rd in order to avoid those 25 and 10% tariffs that are coming. They do also expect an exclusion process that could run 90 days if you want a petition to have a specific steel or aluminum product exempted from this. But again, many of your customers aren't going to wait 90 days in order for you to get your quote. But it's been a real challenge. A lot of this has honestly been negotiated in the media to try to educate the administration and the White House and the president about really what's at stake when applying tariffs to help a certain segment of the economy and how that's going to have an effect throughout manufacturing.
And this has really been an unprecedented 2-3 weeks regarding media attention for PMA members. As we did in 2001, PMA members have really become the voice of small and medium-sized steel users in this country, and we have been trying to get the message out that, as Omar indicated, there are 6.5 million workers in steel-using industries in the United States compared to about 140,000 in the steel-producing industry. And look, we all want manufacturing to thrive in this country. We want steel workers to do well, and we want those who use steel to do well. And this, our job has been to explain that this policy is just not going to grow manufacturing. In fact, it will have the opposite effect. We've already gone through this in 2002 when President Bush imposed 30% tariffs on imports of steel from everywhere except, as in this case, Mexico and Canada. And studies showed that we lost 200,000 jobs in the steel-using sector. There actually was a study by the same group that came out last week that estimates that we're going to lose short-term about 146,000 net jobs from this Steel 232 action last week. So over the past 2 weeks, we've had PMA members who are talking about the impact of the last steel tariffs in 2002, as well as the potential impact of these tariffs on their businesses. And they've been appearing on TV. For example, Roy Hardy, who's the president of PMA, was on CNBC. The former president, Bill Gaskin, was on CNN. We've had members in the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal and dozens of other publications. And we're just trying to explain the impact that when you protect the upstream folks, but you don't protect the downstream users, the negative impact that that's going to have both on the manufacturing sector and on the broad economy in the U.S.
Yeah, I can remember when that happened in 2000. Was it 2002 when we had the steel tariffs imposed? It was a situation where when I was talking to manufacturers across the U.S., they had to make a decision if they were going to continue to manufacture here anymore, because people could buy imported steel in Canada and they could buy imported steel in Mexico, produce a product, ship it in, and they were able to ship it in for less cost than they were buying the steel for. And that gives an unfair advantage in the manufacturing sector to basically our partners in many instances, if we talk about that, to Canada and Mexico, but gives them a huge advantage over us in the manufacturing sector. Now, in the short term, it may look good from a standpoint of the materials and raw goods, and you think everything's using that, but in many cases, the raw material can be a huge part of the actual cost, and you're giving them a competitive advantage in those countries where we already have no kind of regulations coming into the U.S. So I applaud you guys for trying to get out ahead of this and get the message out and help with getting us some, as Omar has said before, a seat at the table, which is really a challenge for us to make sure that people do hear our voice in manufacturing. What are some of the things that manufacturers can do to be involved with the advocacy and also the communication messaging going out to people and help people to understand why this is important to them?
Well, and so right now this has to be, as I mentioned, virtually the entire manufacturing sector, with the exception of steel producers and unions, are opposing this effort. And so we are not alone, but we are leading the charge, because you have to be, the downstream manufacturers are truly the face of manufacturing. Without us, nothing goes, nothing drives, nothing climbs or flies. And so we really need to be able to, through Paul's great work, get that message out. But we also need to make sure that employees are active, that businesses are speaking up. in many cases, a lot of people still just have the misperception that steel manufacturing equals all manufacturing. To Paul's point, there's about 140,000 steel manufacturing jobs in the country. There's 12.3 million total manufacturing jobs in general in the country, over 12 million. And so educating your lawmakers, educating the White House especially, that there is definitely a distinction between helping one part of the manufacturing sector versus what will help all boats rise that are out there. So getting in touch with your members of Congress is definitely important. Visiting www.metalworkingadvocate.org is an advocacy website PMA has set up that will help you learn a little bit more about it. There's also going to be a new website set up called tariffs-are-taxes.org as well, which will help further educate the public. And this is an opportunity for you to go online, sign a White House petition opposing these tariffs, send a letter to your members of Congress opposing the tariffs. We really, again, just need to get that education campaign ramped up quite a bit, as Paul said.
Yeah, and agree. And I think it's very important for policymakers to hear from individual companies and to hear directly from owners of those companies and employees that the impact that raising the price of such an important input such as steel and or aluminum has on the company's ability to compete with global competitors who make the same parts and products that we do, but again will be paying far less for their steel and able to import it into our market with no tariff involved.
That's a really important point, if I could, because right now the U.S. currently has 165 anti-dumping and countervailing duty orders currently in place on imports of steel. That means that there are already duties, in some cases as low as 3%, in some cases 522% in the case of cold-rolled steel combined duties coming in from China. So we already know that we have the trade laws to do these. And a recent February 28th report showed us that hot-rolled band is $250 more expensive in the United States over China, but $140 more expensive than Western Europe. So in a lot of cases, it comes to not just pricing, but then availability, especially when we get into specialty metals produced largely in Western Europe that we simply just do not make in the United States. And that goes again to Paul's point of getting that message out in the media to our target audience that are the policymakers predominantly over in the White House.
Excellent. And we want to thank you guys for doing that and getting the word out. What other issues do we have associated with that? How is that being perceived from the possible loss of 146,000 jobs? How is the average manufacturer seeing this, and how are they shifting their businesses in accordance with this? Because a lot of companies I know have plants not only in the U.S., they have plants in Canada, in Mexico, they have plants overseas in China. Is this impacting how they're shifting their resources?
Oh, certainly. Those that do have the opportunity to relocate some of the work but still keep it within the company, even if it's not located in the United States, that certainly is going to be an advantageous position for them to sort of weather this thing out here. The real concern that we've got now, especially that you've got the exclusion from Canada and Mexico, is you simply are just going to see an increase of stampings coming in from those two countries. For both automotive and non-automotive stampings, Canada and Mexico are both number 1 and number 3 inverted in both categories, automotive and non, for imports of metal stampings into the United States. So they're now going to be contained foreign steel, all coming into the United States, tariff-free. So that's really what you're looking at now, an artificial self-imposed 25% increase. And for many of the PMA members especially, some of those steel accounts for 60 to 70% of their input costs. And so that's just an untenable situation for them, especially if they don't really have any relief or a way to pass it down along to their customer that some businesses in the industry do not currently possess. So we are looking at how they're trying to figure out right now what their strategies are, how to communicate directly with their customers, try to not hit that panic button, and being able to just say, how can we go through this together? How much can a customer absorb a new price increase? And then how much can we maybe share the burden together to avoid collectively losing that business to another upstream sort of part of the manufacturing chain that will then just source a complete part from overseas containing, again, foreign steel and aluminum.
And I would only reinforce what Omar has to say is that every manufacturer needs to have good communication with both his or her supplier and his or her customer. And hoping for the best is not a strategy in this situation. We saw last time during the 201 steel tariffs when, according to the U.S. government, we lost 19% of metal stampers in this country as from high steel prices, mostly the result of the steel tariff. So communication with your customers and communication with your suppliers is essential in this case.
Yeah, and as far as speaking on that communication portion of it, is that something that we feel as a manufacturer that we have a clear message of the potential, because let me put it this way, the world is a worldwide market nowadays. So people are looking at things. You can look at Amazon, and when you buy products, there's a fair amount of them coming in from China directly, let alone the ones that are being imported and then sold locally. And as part of that, how do we compete in those kinds of workplaces when we're losing some of the advantages of manufacturing here to basically instead just importing? What are some of the downsides that we see because of that?
Well, I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that. I think that the capabilities for manufacturing, they've been, in fact, more advanced and more technical. And I think you can see that, especially with businesses that do have operations themselves down in Mexico, where you're doing the more complicated, sophisticated work up here, and then maybe more the simple stamping mechanisms and processes and finishing, for example, down in Mexico. And so I don't know that it's exactly happening on the importation. I understand the Walmart and the Amazons here and there, but we're even seeing wages in China start to increase so much to the point where they're no longer competitive with the low-cost countries and developing ones down in Southeast Asia as well. And so in the U.S., I think that we're increasingly looking at being more sophisticated, but you're also, I think, noticing the production per employee rates increase, and a lot of that obviously is due to automation that was almost basically required after the Great Recession and people started to ramp up. So we are continuing to manufacture quite a bit. I think our message on tariffs is that we shouldn't be fully disrupting the supply chain without looking at a holistic approach if this is truly going to help. The underlying issue here is China overcapacity of steel and aluminum. That's not a U.S. issue. That's a global issue. I think we all need to sit down at the table with our trading partners. The U.S. started doing that this weekend. How can we address the underlying issue without harming the overall manufacturing sector in the process?
Yeah, and I think we look at statistics and we see that manufacturing has been making a comeback in this country, and that's because people want shorter supply lines and the quality and high-tech aspects of U.S. manufacturing. And we just don't need, and we shouldn't have the U.S. government coming in and really disrupting that by imposing these tariffs. Excellent.
Well, guys, we're about out of time, and I wanted to thank both of you for being here. Thank you, Paul Nathanson, and thank you, Omar Nashashibi, for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here. You guys have a great day, and we'd like to thank our partners, the Precision Metalforming Association and the PMA's Educational Foundation, for sponsoring this show. Thanks, everybody.